Picture a colossal steel fortress standing hundreds of feet above the ocean floor. When it's elevated, it's virtually indestructible, right? It easily withstands the full brutal force of the sea. But what happens when you actually have to pack up that fortress and move it? Well, to do that, you have to turn this incredibly stable platform into a floating vessel. And in doing so, it becomes incredibly vulnerable. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to break down the highly perilous transition of a jack-up rig move. Here's our roadmap for the Explainer. We'll quickly cover the rig's vulnerable state, phase 1 of lowering the hull, shifting weight and wave motion, heavy weather damage control, and finally, the strict decision to move. Section 1. The jack-up's vulnerable state. Safe in the air, but in real peril on the sea. We're literally talking about life or death stakes here. Taking a rig off its secure legs and putting it at the mercy of the ocean is arguably the single most dangerous thing you can do with it. Think about this massive contrast. When elevated, these rigs are safe, stable, and actually generating revenue. But when they're afloat, they're highly vulnerable, completely uneconomic, and perilous, with a terrifyingly low freeboard. They're basically a huge engineering compromise between being a stable drilling platform and acting as a boat. Marine operations expert Michael Hancox hits the nail on the head here. He points out that when these rigs move into hostile waters, best practice and considerable seamanship skills are absolutely required, and they cannot be compensated for by engineered hardware alone. You can't just build a safer machine. You need brilliant, highly skilled human beings to keep the whole shebang from sinking. So a rig move generally happens in 6 distinct steps: preparation, jacking down, getting afloat, the afloat transit, arrival, and positioning. But for us, we're going to slow down and zoom right in on the absolute highest stakes phase, the precise transition between jacking down and getting afloat. Section 2, Phase 1, Lowering the Hull. This is that critical descent down to the waterline. All right, how does this actually work mechanically? The jacking machinery, which is an intense system of electric or hydraulic motors driving pinion gears against the toothed leg racks, lowers the massive hull at a very controlled rate. As the hull slowly descends, the effective leg height above the waterline steadily decreases until, eventually, the bottom of the hull approaches the sea. Now, timing here is literally everything. When the hull finally contacts the waterline, the internal sea chests, which are the water intake valves on the hull bottom, submerge. This triggers a critical cooling water changeover. The rig has to switch its cooling system from the deep well submersible pumps it uses while elevated directly over to those internal sea chests. And crucially, this switch has to be fully completed before the hull begins to take on serious buoyancy. Because right after that, buoyancy builds incredibly fast. As the hull floods down into the water, the whole structure transitions. The immense weight starts to shift off the legs and the jacking machinery, and the rig starts being supported almost entirely by the water itself. Obviously, this precise transition point has to be monitored with absolute precision. Section 3. Shifting weight and wave motion. This is when the sea truly takes hold. The rig is no longer a fixed building. It's a floating vessel. So I want you to think about this for a second. Even if the weather is absolutely beautiful, why is a seemingly calm sea still a massive, unseen danger to a floating jack-up rig? Well, it all comes down to leverage. Once afloat, the hull immediately begins to respond to the sea. Even in super calm conditions, you're going to get some wave, pitch, and roll. Now, because the rig has these massive steel legs sticking hundreds of feet into the air and down into the water, that small motion is transmitted directly to the legs. Basically, as the hull moves with the waves, it acts like a giant lever, violently attempting to move those massive legs sideways within the hull. And that brings us to what we call guide loads. A leg guide is the internal structural steel assembly that the leg actually passes through. When the hull rolls, the massive leg pushes incredibly hard against that guide, creating extreme lateral forces. This is exactly why attempting to jack down in seas that are even slightly too large is so dangerous. It will impose excessive guide loads, potentially causing catastrophic structural damage to the steel before the rig has even moved an inch. Section 4. Heavy weather and damage control. Let's talk about fighting the flood and what happens when the weather inevitably turns bad under tow. As we've established, these rigs are incredibly vulnerable as floating vessels. Their low freeboard means waves can easily wash right over the main deck. You've got huge risks from unsealed vents, open mud pit return lines, and buckled watertight doors. Even worse, the sheer stress of the waves can actually cause the hull structure to crack right near the leg jack houses. Any of these can lead to rapid, progressive flooding.
To put this into perspective, the source material highlights a terrifying, very real scenario. Even modest 5 to 6 meter seas can easily board the rig. Imagine the deck is fully loaded with cargo for a move, and those waves just tear it loose. A massive 5-ton anchor breaks free from its rack, slides across the deck, and literally smashes open watertight doors and ventilators. In a flash, a controlled tow turns into a flooding emergency that can quickly lead to abandoning the rig entirely.
Section 5, the strict decision to move. Because of everything we've just discussed, it all comes down to the limits of man and machine. A towmaster operates on incredibly strict criteria because the margins for error are razor thin. We're talking a maximum wind speed of force 7, or about 33 knots. The combined wave swell absolutely cannot exceed 16 feet, the swell period has to be 6 seconds or less, and the rig's roll and pitch maxes out at a mere 4 degrees. If the forecast breaches those limits, the move simply does not happen. Sticking to those limits requires an intense, almost obsessive level of weather watching. Crews are constantly gathering real-time heave motion data and plotting roll and pitch limits on specialized danger zone graphs. And they have to constantly fight go fever, that immense commercial pressure to start moving because delays cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. The towmaster has to rely purely on cold, hard data and logic before committing. It's an incredible balancing act of physics, engineering, and sheer nerve. Knowing the mechanical vulnerability, those extreme guide loads, and the totally unforgiving nature of a swelling ocean, would you have the skill and the courage to look at the data and make that ultimate go or no-go call? It's a real testament to the incredible seamanship of those who work offshore. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it gave you a completely new perspective on exactly what it takes to move a mountain across the sea.